Introduce her to you. She is an innovative HR executive, seasoned speaker and coach. She specializes in passionately leading learning and development and human resources for teams across North America's most respected organizations. Throughout her career, she has coached senior leaders and built teams from the ground up, in addition to designing and delivering multiple original award-winning programs. It's a great pleasure to introduce you to Dessalen Wood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, just making sure you can see everything here. So I probably get the award for the most interesting title. And I was building this, for this content, really based on what it's been like to be an HR practitioner through the last year and a half. Probably some of the most challenging times, where every time you think you've dealt with the latest change in the work, So what I'm going to be doing is taking you through the intersection, link back to change and how they link back to leadership. So resignations, everybody's talking about the Great Resignation. What does that mean? And I work for Thought Exchange, so I have the right to run public exchanges asking people a big question. Should I stay or should I go? So I put out on LinkedIn a few months ago, I think it was back in August and September, a question, not why are you quitting, but what would your company have to do to keep you? Because really that's the question we care about most. What is it that's keeping you here? And I'm sure there's probably no surprise to you what kind of results we got. So this question, with the increase in resignations, what do you need to stay in your organization right now? So over the course of a couple of days, I got over 300 people in there, which was great. And they gave me a bunch of different reasons. We got frontline people, mid-level managers, senior executives. And interestingly enough, the data that came in showed that the number one reason people said they'd stay in their organization was flexibility. Anybody surprised? No. Because that's all we were hearing on the media, right? Everything was about, if you're going to be flexible, you're going to keep your employees, and companies who are trying to bring employees back were losing them. So how many companies here have some kind of flex work program or process right now? Hands up, right? So there's a lot of flexibility. How many of you are losing people? You see the same hands go up? So that's really interesting about data, and I know there's a lot of data people here, which is the idea that if the number one reason that you think in terms of the most frequent thing we heard was flexibility, at least saying flexibility, provide flexibility, and still have people quit. And what the media would have you think at the time, which is, but in fact, all the other things that people cared about were still relevant, it just wasn't top of mind. So when you run a thought exchange, you actually just ask people what they think, and the AI is reading the thoughts. And what was great about it is we also do a thing called importance, which is the number of stars people gave to other people's thoughts. So imagine you're Amazon reviewing someone's thoughts. So you wrote flexibility because you've been reading it in the media, so it's on your mind, so that's the first thing you said. And then you're starting to rate the other reasons people put in there that maybe weren't said as often, but now you're giving them 4 or 5 stars. And what we found is that, and I don't know if you can see this, is that almost everything received the same amount of stars. What is that? Whether it was about your culture, about your leadership, about being trusted, about autonomy, about your benefits, about pay and flexibility. Everybody's giving everything 5 stars. What does that mean? What it means is, you could say, well, this is self-entitled millennials who want everything, millennials out there. But what I would say here is that it's an interesting thing here, because what we were led to believe was that we had one thing we had to do to retain people. But in reality, people actually want a really amazing place to work across all levels. And it's not about doing one thing to do it. And I think what happened is, in this craze about how do we figure out remote work and hybrid work, we dropped the ball on the traditional things that make employees happy and create a wonderful environment by overvaluing one thing. And then we're surprised that we did that and they're leaving anyway. So to me, this was probably the most interesting thing that I came out of it, was the number one, just by a slice, was I want people who lead with intentional care. That's what we want first. And right next to flexibility was appreciation and trust. And actually compensation came later. And when I talk to people, though, in the world about why people are leaving, they'll say to me, well, they want to stay home, they want to work where I want to work, when I want to work. But then there was also, I want really clear communication. I'm in remote situations and I want to make sure I'm getting really intentional communication. And then look at this last one. which is really important for this audience. I want transparency about organizational changes and the goals and the willingness to listen to feedback. So interestingly enough, what I see is the employee population is pushing us to raise the bar on how we're running our companies. And what's really interesting also, organizations lowering the bar because you're supposed to be grateful to be there, to give a better employee experience. And another couple of really interesting thoughts that came up. I also want a diverse company. So I'm not even just talking about the conditions I work in, I'm even talking about the kind of people I work with. So here again, we know that this has been on everyone's radar for years, but really interesting for me to see it in an exchange about what do you need to stay in your organization. And then over here, it also says not just diversity in terms of how people are in their backgrounds, but I want leaders who actually listen to those diverse and different ideas and that they actually of think thought is a really interesting concept because who here has been disrupted? Whose business has been disrupted in the last 5 years? Major disruptions. Again, if your hand's not up, it just yet. So I come from Cineplex before Thought in Canada. Who do you think disrupted Cineplex? Yeah, Netflix, thank you. It's like a verb. We got Netflixed. You might have gotten Ubered or Airbnb'd, right? Somebody comes for you and they disrupt your entire business. So what's really interesting when you're being disrupted is that you go from having this really clear business model that just feeds it, and every year you just get a teeny bit better, but you know, nothing's really gonna happen to you, and suddenly madness occurs because you try to protect your bottom line. How do you do that? How do companies try to protect their bottom lines? Well, one way is to acquire other companies, right? Or try to grow new businesses or change their products. What ends up happening is the environment changes dramatically. Because in that first business model that was, you know, I'd call it legacy businesses, weren't really challenged. We have a set of people who were there from the ground up, who know each other and have worked together forever and who are best buddies, right? And now as we're becoming disruptive, trying to bring in new kinds of thinking and different kinds of leaders, and we're acquiring new businesses, well, the cats aren't so happy anymore, you know? Right? Because it doesn't feel like we're one team anymore. And so it's one thing to bring in different people, it's another thing to find a way to actually maximize what they're bringing to you. So I told this story for a long time. It's part of what, you know, what set me up as a facilitator back in my 20s. I was working, being trained by a former executive of a large US organization. He'd left. And he was just telling a story, like anecdotally, when someone said, how did you, I was working there, they brought in a new CEO, people, and then there was me and the other team, and now we are the B team because he brought in the A team, because you know there's multiple teams, right? So when you're in the B team, kind of hard to sort of share what you're honestly thinking. So what ended up happening is that this CEO thought that he had a real open communication style. I asked people what they think, gets them around the boardroom table, and he says, listen, I get the sensing there's some tension around my new strategy. The guy, Steve, who was the facilitator, said, you know, we knew there were big holes in this new strategy based on our knowledge of the business. And so, but there was this pressure to agree with him because he said, I want to go around the room and I want to hear what you think of my idea out of 10. Right? So what do you think happens here? Yeah, well, the first person says 10, the other one says 10, and Steve and his buddies who had sworn that they've got to tell him what are the problems with this strategy in order to implement in this organization. Well, by the time he sees his friend saying 10 and the other guy saying 10, he ends up saying 9.5. And so within 18 months, the entire strategy was a failure and everybody around the table had been replaced. Now, when I heard that story, I was like, that's the craziest story I ever heard. How could that ever happen? And then I moved my way up in my corporate roles. I got into the boardroom and I was like, oh, this is what we do. We just 10 Bob 10 things. And then we come out and we DM or message each other and go, well, that's going to be a disaster. Right? So what is it? Why is it that you can bring in disruptive thinking and the people around you can't get around that and support you? What is it that's happening? And there's a few reasons. Is that agreeing feels really good. Now, you might think, I've never thought of that, but I want to bring you to a moment. You ever been in a meeting, whether it's virtual or live, where everybody's wildly agreeing about something? And you know, when you think about why we even have meetings, we say things like, we need to get aligned, we need to get on the same page. It's essentially in a culture of imagined emergency, we want to agree as possible. We want to save time. So you ever see the person when we're about to finish 15 minutes early and everyone's like, yeah, I got this. Yeah, I'm good with that. That's good. Who's like, actually, could we go back a couple of slides? I'm not really sure. Yeah, does anybody be like, thank God you're here? No, what do people think when that's happening? Come on, shout it. Shut up, exactly. It's like, oh God, that was gonna be like the only time I was gonna eat and go to the bathroom, thank you. Right? So we don't actually celebrate people who think differently, and I'll tell you why. We have a whole way of dealing with that. This is what happens. Person's going on and on and on, and everybody's like, oh my God, shoot me now. And then somebody says, let's take this off. Oh yeah. That's the long way of saying shut up over there. You ever been to the offline meeting? No, it doesn't happen. So we actually have a whole way of ritualizing the fact that when we gather together, we're here to agree as quickly as possible. And should you disrupt that thinking, we're going to tell you to shut up in a really polite way that'll teach you to never have a new idea again. And we wonder why our businesses are disrupted. And we wonder why when we bring in different ways of thinking, we don't maximize that way of thinking. I come from Quebec, and we have a saying, qui se ressemble s'assemble, which translates into those who resemble assemble. It's really, really hard to fight this urge to be the same out there. Fit. What do we mean when we say the person's not a fit? What if I want to say that I don't know if Karen is a fit? What am I really saying here? Come on. Can't hear you. Different, annoying. If Karen were incompetent, I would say doesn't get things done on time, has no attention to detail, right? But when I just drop the F word of fit, everyone's like, yeah, not a fit, not a fit, not a fit. And what is a fit? Usually somebody from a civil industry, similar background, they don't disagree with you, and they don't feel like they slow things down, because the truth is that diverse and disruptive thinking does slow things down. It slows things down so that you can figure out a new way of doing things. So we, again, are still having these outdated ideas of what works in an organization, layering on the concept that we're going to disrupt and be diverse and we're going to challenge our disruptors. Well, good luck. So there's some science behind this. If you just think we're terrible, it's actually there's science behind this. And that's this idea of in-groups and out-groups that we often hear when we're doing D&I discussions, which is this feeling that, you know, the in-group is people who have one set of stereotypes, and they feel very uncomfortable when they're challenged. And it's uncomfortable, meaning that they do scans on brains, and they see that the amygdala, where fear and discomfort sit, light up when somebody challenges one of your founding beliefs. So you actually feel pain. Your brain registers pain the way you have a stomach cramp when somebody's challenging your way of thinking. And if you don't believe me, think of what it's like to be disagreed with. Your stomach usually clenches a little bit, yeah? There's like this feeling of like, because there's a fear and stress response when you're being disrupted. Now, this is a really interesting thing, because when we bring in different ways of thinking, do we tell people, I'm just warning you, this will cause you some pain? No, we don't. And the truth is that people don't like pain. People like pleasure. Does that surprise? So what is that when somebody confirms a stereotype and agrees with you, it actually lights up the reward center in your brain. That's that whole reason why agreeing feels good. You actually feel that excitement. And so again, in doing MRIs, while people are being disagreed with, we see the pain center light up. When we're doing the MRI on somebody having a stereotype or a bias or a belief confirmed, the pleasure center lights up in the exact same way as if you snorted a line of cocaine. Not the comparison you expected. But I want you to think of how rewarding it is to have the things you believe to be shown to be true. And again, I want you to think about that as people who are bringing in change and transformation. You're working against a chemical reason, a chemical fight. And if I'm going to get even more detailed here, I actually have a neurologist, neuroscientist husband who found me a really great bias study, because a lot of people say this is fluff. So I was like, find me the hard science. And I'm going to tell you something. This is probably the most interesting study I've heard on this. There's a piece of music being played, same piece of music twice. Ready? The people are told one time they hear it, it's played by the master. The second time they hear it, it's played by the student. Same piece of music. So you can see here that the enjoyment of the music is almost twofold when people think it's played by the master, same song. All right, so people listened more And the reward center in their brain lit up more, meaning I listened more intently when I thought it was the master, and I enjoyed it more when I thought it was the master. I listened less when I thought it was a student, and I enjoyed it less. Same part of the brain. So I don't know how many ladies are here, but you know we hear this concept of like mansplaining, where if a man says it, they're like, I just said that. Why is everybody listening to him? It's the brain. It's actually doing that. So again, if we're trying to bring in younger ways of thinking, different ways of thinking, those old stated ways of thinking are going to outweigh when you're listening. And here's something else interesting. The group of people who actually could identify it was the same piece of music, there was a group of people, were exhausted by it because they had to use multiple areas of the brain to combat this desire, outweigh the master to the student. They left feeling tired. They used a lot more energy, meaning that if you are tired, hungry, worn out, you are more likely to default to the idea of the master is better than the student. This thought is better than that thought. Now, how many people here know that their people are suffering from exhaustion right now? Right? So our biases are actually at an all-time high when we're at a period of time where we're talking about overcoming them. So we want to overcome them, but we're not set up to overcome them because, just so you know, our brains haven't had a major software update in 70,000 years. So the idea that we can talk our way out of this is going to be near impossible. And that's why I talk a lot about how technology can help you overcome this kind of bias towards different and disruptive thinking. So now we have people who've quit, right? We're using those open slots to move and shift to bring in new ways of thinking, right? Because that's, you know, when people leave, there's actually an opportunity to do this. It's like, this is our opportunity to shake things up. Now we know the people we bring to shake things up are struggling with doing that. And now we're going to have them do this remotely, remote shaking things up. So this is a lot of layers of challenge that we're putting on this supposedly transformation that's happening out in this world. There's a lot of strikes against it that we have to support if we're going to bring real change to organizations. So how do you do this when you're remote, knowing you have so much against you? Well, onboarding is interesting because most onboarding is not successful in the sense that up to 30% actually fail within 2 years and 23% of internal transfers. And you're like, well, why did they fail? Well, we asked those people, why did you think you failed? And they said politics was the main reason that they failed, trying to bring in change too fast. How many people here are trying to bring in change? Disruptive and bring in change and be remote all at the same time. Hence my first image of how these things are all intersecting right now. Because it's really hard for you to bring in the person who wants to go back to slide 6, right? You're automatically in the out group. And we know that listening to you when you're from the out group causes me physical pain. And listening to the same people I've listened to for these years gives me pleasure. So how am I going to do this when I'm even doing this on Teams or on Zoom? So the example I have is for us. I'm using a personal example. I actually was looking, I found a new head of product. That's a huge position for us to take our product in a new direction. So just so you know, Ingroups and Outgroups, because we're no different than anyone else, our entire came from a previous acquisition together. Talk about a group, right? They work together and they live in British Columbia, which is like, there are Canadians here, they would laugh. And he's not from their business. He doesn't live, he's 3 time zones away. He's being onboarded remotely. What's the likelihood he's going to be able to disrupt and be supported and be listened to, right? And not be sent to the offline meeting. So it's really interesting as we use thought exchange here, where we ask questions like, what's important for me to know as the new head of product in order for me to be successful? How do I fast track the relationships that you would have had if you'd been here for all these years? So one of the things our product does is it lets a bunch of people in a few minutes. It can be a couple of days. We're going to try it in a minute. And they gave him insights. So the theming is happening automatically. And there was insights for him about customers. This is what you need to know. This is what you need to know about thought exchange. This is what you need to know about the product. This is what you need to know about the team. And if you click on any of those bars, you'll see the thoughts that go in there. So essentially, even though he hasn't met anybody, we did this for him the day before he started. So we could hand him the insights that you would get if you were in the in group, if everybody wanted you to win. if people actually cared and invested in that. Because what's the likely, and how many hours would 54 meetings take anyway? But in the space of a few days, we were able to sit down with this new head of product and say, here's all the things everybody wants you to know about from that 10 Bob 10 room. Remember the guy Steve was like, I had things to say, but I couldn't do it. We're like, make it safe for them to say it, and also make it safe for this person to learn, so that when he actually does get his one-on-one meetings, he can actually skip from the first date to the 5th date and say, this is a really interesting top thought around the customer, I'd like to know more. This is a quote he gave me. I describe my onboarding as revolutionary. Crowdsource feedback from cross-functional teams to define my 30-60-90 plan in the span of. So instead of asking him to figure out how to change the company, like my 10 Bob 10 story, without actually understanding the lay of the land, and then come back to us with your plan and share that plan with the very same people who gave you the insights to validate what they feel about it. Because what we're going to do, and I'm actually speaking again tomorrow on this, is people resist change because they're not involved in it. Not because they're change averse, but because they're not respected. A lot of times when we bring in change, people feel that they're being disrespected and they put the change agent in the out group. So what we're trying to do here is do everything we can to fast track that relationship, understanding how important those insights are, but also the humility of the new leader to use those insights before they put together their plan. So the plan includes the voice of people. And then we say, after you finished it, 3-6 months later, whatever you do, go check back and see what you learned from it. And this is really key when you're remote, because you're not going to necessarily get the relationships to do this naturally. And what will end up happening is you're going to really just survey a very small group that you have and probably again get into a feedback circle. And so what this does, and this is especially for us because we're an 100% remote company, is instead of having 1 or 2 people when someone's new say a couple of things and then you overvalue those couple of things, so that's all you heard. Again, very dangerous when you're bringing change. What Thought Exchange does is it makes possible for everybody to contribute to what's organization. And that's how you build trust at scale. And really, in order to their internal promotions or external hires, is get them from that initial relationship to the trusted relationship as fast as we naturally can. And if we do that, we're going to then benefit from that kind of thinking for an organization, and we're going to have the benefits of actually seeing some change come from all these resignations. So I want you to try this. We're going to talk first here. Okay, this is my summary. I want you to do a thought experiment. Ready for a thought experiment? This is a long question. I wouldn't normally use this. But I want you to imagine, don't take out your phones yet, imagine that I'm in your organization. Just think about that. Just imagine, tomorrow's my first day. You've just met me. Maybe you've got a little LinkedIn thing about me. What information is important for me to know about your company, team, and its objectives before I onboard into your company? So I want you to just imagine this, because we're going to try to do this live. So what a thought exchange is, and just give me a moment, is you're going to get out your phone and you're going to put it on camera. You're not going to click on it, and you're going to be able to do a couple of things. I think there's one survey question. Then you're going to share a thought or two, as many as you want. When you've done sharing, you're going to star the thoughts of others. 5 stars if you agree with it, 1 star, 2 stars if you don't. And you're going to see the results of the exchange. Thoughts of things you think would be helpful for me to know. If you're having trouble getting in, just raise your hand and somebody from my team will come help you. I'm going to give you a couple minutes now. In. again, when you're finished your thought, just go done sharing and then go to rating. Should we be moving on to the rating phase? If you're not there. Try to rate at least 10 thoughts in the time that we have left. Just going to give another 30 seconds. I'm going to leave it open, but I want to show you a couple things. Going to give you another 10 seconds to rate. All right. In the interest of time, tomorrow I'm going to be hosting a roundtable, and I'm going to be taking coming. But I want you to see what just happened here. I give you 4 minutes. In 4 minutes and 10 seconds, me, somebody in your outgroup, somebody you've never really met, just got over 100 insights from you. And Steph, you want to change it? I don't know if you actually do this. We have to overcome the outgroup that the different thinker is coming. And at the same time, we have to make it safe to be disruptive. And in doing that, you are going to benefit, believe it or not, from these resignations, even in a remote environment. So I want to thank you very much, invite you to the roundtable, and I also have, I think, a second talk tomorrow. So thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, Des. Always delivering. Very insightful, very interesting. I have a quick question before you leave.
Yes.
What about the book?
Oh, I'm allowed to stay?
Scaling Conversations.
Yes.
What is that about?
I did not mention that. Yes, our CEO actually wrote a book called Scaling Conversations, which are really around the science and the art to having large group discussions. Many people are scared of doing it because they feel that this is going to create some sort of horde mentality. In fact, there's a way to design questions and to use them at very strategic moments that in fact hasten, they actually make things go faster and meet less resistance than not engaging with people at all. So this book is at your desks or your tables. So thank you for that.
Big thank you to Dessalen Wood again. Thank you so much, Des.